Hello and welcome in.
Please do not leave your luggage unattended on the station.
Welcome to the show.
That's right. Welcome to a special Saturday edition of Off Field here at Guerilla Sports, presented as always by our friends at Trusted American Mortgage. You can go to trustedamerican.com and see how they can save you money today on your mortgage. Again, trustedamerican.com. Myck Miller's been in Buffalo probably seemingly for weeks. I'm making my way there as well. We're both in hotels currently, and so it's always fun. But these are our mobile hotel Trusted American studios. Myck, just give me an overview. Appreciate you joining me as always, but give me an overview of how things are going in Buffalo, because we talked to Sal, the sideline reporter, earlier in the week, and he said that they're not nervous, but they're not overly confident because folks in Buffalo, not only do they know the pressure, they know that this Broncos team is maybe better than the odds makers think they are.
Yeah, first things first, appreciate you having me on the show. Obviously, it's cold in Buffalo. That's going to be, the obvious thing that's going on in January. I think there's also a little bit of stress from Bills Mafia, just from the standpoint of they've been trying to get over the hump like every team in the AFC that points towards Arrowhead, and not having home field advantage this year, obviously, is a big storyline for the team. They're also looking at it from a standpoint of when the All-Pros came out yesterday, and the Broncos obviously had the 5 All-Pros come out. Josh Allen was the only All-Pro for the Buffalo Bills, obviously being a second-team All-Pro, which means, is Lamar Jackson going to be the MVP this season over Josh Allen? So there's a bit of using that as bulletin board material. But yeah, Bills Mafia obviously is very excited to have a home game here tomorrow against the Denver Broncos. But there is a little bit of angst of, can they get the job done? Because I think a lot of the national pundits are finally giving the Denver Broncos a little bit of credit here, probably solely because of their head coach, Sean Payton. If you're going Sean Payton against Sean McDermott, I would take Coach Payton every single day of the week, twice on Sunday. So it'll be interesting to see how this one plays out, but there's definitely a little bit of angst inside Bills Mafia, which I'm sure tomorrow the tailgates will get rid of a lot of that.
Yeah, it is great when you can, I guess, warm up with some fireball shots and jumping through burning tables and all of that. Have you ever covered a game there? Because I've covered a few, and it's a college-like atmosphere, and I do think that does play into it. I'm not saying that it truly affects the game, but we know that home field advantage exists for a reason, and I think that because of that, you got to give Buffalo a little bit of a nod in that regard. But have you been to a game there yet? Did you go last year for the Monday Nighters?
No, Sunday is going to be the first time that I cover a game at Highmark Stadium. And so I've been in Buffalo since Thursday afternoon. And so I went to Highmark Stadium the last couple of days, and then been doing my live shots for Fox 31 Channel 2 and Colorado Sports Night right outside the stadium. And fans have been out there. There's a team store right outside the stadium, so people have been buying their merch. And so I just kind of wanted to get a pulse of what the vibe is on Bills Mafia. Obviously, I've seen the viral videos, and everybody's, like you said, BK, has talked about how it's just kind of like a college-like atmosphere, that people are going to start tailgating actually tonight, and that some of the local residents, because if you've been out at Highmark Stadium, it's not like Mile High where the stadium's downtown. It's basically in a neighborhood. So when I put it into Google Maps and it said, you have arrived at Highmark Stadium, I looked around, there was like 2 bars and a bunch of like open space. So it kind of felt like a college experience where there's not like a big city. There's not a lot of things to do around the stadium. Obviously, they had the construction of the new stadium, which is going to open up not next year, but in 2026. So yeah, I think it's interesting that this team has the college type feel. Buffalo feels like one of those markets similar to like Green Bay, where there's not a lot of things to do, and everything that goes on in the city surrounds the NFL team. So yeah, they're going to start tailgating tonight. They'll obviously be rowdy tomorrow morning, and then kickoff. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how the Denver Broncos handle it, because obviously really the only one that has serious postseason experience is their head coach. So it'll be interesting to see. I'll be interested to see the communication. I think Jonathan Cooper talked in the locker room this week about how communication is key, especially on the defensive line when trying to guard Josh Allen. You can't really ad lib or do anything without communicating on the defensive line. And then on the offensive side, we know Sean Payton has those long play calls. Does Bo Nix have enough experience receiving those calls from head coach Sean Payton to be able to do it in playoff atmosphere in Bills Mafia? That'll be something that's interesting to see. But yeah, there's definitely the vibe that this is like a college football town. Everybody in this city is all Bills Mafia all the time. There is obviously the Buffalo Sabres, but that franchise hasn't been good for a long time. So really, they're just capitalizing on the opportunity that they have. They have Josh Allen playing at an elite level, and this team has been trying to get over that hump, and it feels like this year, a lot of pressure on this organization to get it done this season.
Yeah, and that's sort of been where I've thought if the Broncos can keep it close, you still have to obviously make plays. But you get into that third quarter, if it's close at halftime, or if the Broncos have some sort of slight lead, and as the third quarter plays out, and you get into that fourth quarter, I think they're going to pucker up a little bit. And that pressure of when are we going to get over that hump with Josh Allen? When are we going to beat Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs? When are we going to not only host championship games, but get back to a Super Bowl? And you talk about the atmosphere in that city, and I mentioned Sal Capaccio, the sideline reporter there. He is a little bit older than I am. I know I'm a little bit older than you. He was at Syracuse in the early 90s when the Bills were going to Super Bowls. Back then, Syracuse was the 35th largest TV market, media market in the country. It's currently 60th. So Buffalo was 35th then. It's now 60th. So Buffalo hasn't necessarily grown the way other cities have, and obviously gotten surpassed by cities like Austin or Ann Arbor, or whatever it may be. It's certainly the growth of Denver. We know all about that. And all they do have is the Bills. Now, they do love their Sabres, and they love their hockey. First time I ever went to a game there, I was kind of struck by the same thing as you were. Back in 2015, I was working for Westwood One. And yeah, you're just driving through a neighborhood, not as stark as Lambeau. You're like, oh, there's Lambeau Field, but you're some nice houses. And you're like, oh, okay, here's the stadium. And then also the Saturday night before I had the Sunday game, really good college football was on. Notre Dame, USC, and that was on a few TVs. Hockey was on every TV, like random other games. The Thrashers were playing Carolina. That game was on. Like, okay, they love their hockey up here, but we know they love their Bills for sure.
Yeah, and it feels like this team right now, there's a lot of pressure on them. Like, they're no longer the cute little story of, hey, the Bills are in the playoffs, or hey, we won a playoff game. Like, that story is kind of subsided. It's really like, if they don't win on Sunday, there's a feeling that Sean McDermott could be gone. Because remember, last year there was a story that came out. It kind of felt like a hit piece on Sean McDermott. He kind of weathered the storm and lost against the Kansas City Chiefs again. And it kind of felt like he survived that storm last year. But if they lose to the Broncos on Sunday, especially with like the candidates that are currently interviewing for jobs, you got Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson. You have these up and coming guys who you think would have an impact in Buffalo, even though Sean McDermott is a good head coach. It just doesn't seem that he's gotten over the hump yet. So there's a lot of pressure in this game for Buffalo, which is a huge advantage for the Denver Broncos, because Bo Nix was asked about it on Wednesday's press conference down at Broncos Park. Like, what are the advantages of being an underdog? And he said, you can play loose. And Buffalo, I don't think, has the luxury of playing loose in this game, because you can't look past the Denver Broncos. If they win, they would face, I think, the winner of Baltimore and Pittsburgh. And so if Lamar Jackson's coming to town, and then you have to go through him, who's probably going to be the MVP, then you might have to see the Kansas City Chiefs in the championship. Like, it just looks like there are bigger things ahead for the Buffalo Bills, but they can't look past the Denver Broncos, because don't count out Sean Payton. Like, don't think he doesn't have something up his sleeve in the game plan like he did in the Super Bowl when he beat the Indianapolis Colts. So, yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see, like, the vibe of Bills Mafia, because obviously when they're taking shots out of bowling balls and jumping through tables, that's all a good time. But, like, when kickoff finally happens and, say, the Denver Broncos get the first possession, they go down and score a touchdown. Like, the vibe of that stadium is going to be super tight. It's not going to be as loose. And I think this Bills team, they need to feed off Bills Mafia. But if the Denver Broncos can deliver that first punch, it's going to be an uphill climb.
I think you're right, Mick. They need to obviously take advantage of their opportunities in terms of being the home team and having the crowd behind them and all of that. And so, when you're the home team and you've got all this pressure, and like you mentioned, you've got likely the Ravens next week, and I guess we'll know here later tonight what happens with that Ravens-Steelers game. But you're thinking about Baltimore. You're thinking about when are we finally going to beat Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, who came in here and beat us last year. And if I'm Sean Payton, we've seen him do it a few times. He did it in Cincinnati. He did it against the Chargers, I believe, where they've won the toss and he's elected to take the football because he wants to set a tone. And the Bills defense has some interesting numbers. They certainly aren't what the Broncos defense is. They're 7th in points allowed, but I think that part of that is because they've had leads and been able to really kind of dictate the tempo. Because of that, also, their pass defense isn't great statistically, but as I mentioned, talking to Sal and looking at, you go back and watch some of the film, they're pretty susceptible against the run. They're 12th against the run in terms of yards allowed, but that's, I think, circumstantial because their offense is so good in points and top 10 in every category because of what they're able to do. It skews the game. But if you can jump up quick and not only get maybe that first field goal, but you can go there, and if you can open up that opening drive with a touchdown, then all of a sudden, I think just, we talk about the pressure in the second half. Early on, if the Broncos can take the crowd out of it, I think that can be a huge advantage.
Yeah, for sure. And I think also like the Denver Broncos defense is the perfect defense to slow down the Buffalo Bills because Buffalo moved off Stephon Diggs this offseason. They really don't have a true number one. Khalil Shakir obviously is their leading wide receiver, and rookie Keon Coleman is right behind him. I don't think that they have a superstar wide receiver. It's going to really living in the trenches, and the front seven is going to be key for the Denver Broncos because Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox, I think, are going to be the weapons that could hurt the Denver Broncos defense. And then obviously James Cook is a really good running back. But putting Patrick Surtain in the back end of that defense, and hopefully Riley Moss is fully healthy and kind of back into the rhythm of things after he missed nearly a month of play with that knee injury. I don't think that the Buffalo Bills offense is explosive aside from their quarterback. So if you can have a spy on Josh Allen, and whether that's Justin Stranad or Cody Barton, make sure that they have all eyes on Josh Allen. And like Jonathan Cooper said, don't ad lib or do anything too cute on the defensive line. There's not really anybody on the outside for the Buffalo Bills that could hurt the Denver Broncos, which I think is advantageous for Denver because I think Cortland Sutton is going to be obviously number one receiver for Bo Nix, but also Marvin Mims has been getting into a groove, 4 touchdowns in the last 2 games, and he could take the top off that defense for Buffalo. It would put Denver in an advantageous situation where if they do score first and you have Josh Allen not being able to have the luxury of just handing it off to James Cook and being patient in the offensive game plan, we've seen Josh Allen be vulnerable when he tries to put on the Superman cape. And I think the reason he had such an efficient year this year, he didn't feel like he had to force feed a number one receiver like Stephon Diggs. He could just really play in the flow of the offense. But in the postseason, Josh tends to try to put that Superman cape on. And I think the Broncos defense, especially with their ability to get to the quarterback in the back end of the defense, Patrick Surtain, I asked him on Wednesday, hey, what's key to, the second act plays that Josh Allen has? And he says, you just got to plaster yourself to these wide receivers and make sure you stay locked on them. I think Denver and Vance Joseph in this defense in particular, I think they match up really well against the Buffalo Bills offense. The question will be offensively for Denver, can they avoid the turnovers? Can Bo Nix kind of get into a rhythm early and got to get his confidence up and not feel like he has to press too much?
Yeah, as we've seen against good teams, you just don't have the same margin for error. Now, they've been down against bad teams and been able to come back. And even against good teams, they've obviously hung tough or had a lead like they did against the Chargers and let that slip away. But going back to what you mentioned with Pat Surtain, what I think might be an advantage, and Vance Joseph didn't want to maybe tip his hand too much on Thursday when we talked to him, but I asked, hey, because they don't have that number one with Stephon Diggs being gone, and we know they're talented, in Buffalo, they look at it as an advantage because he's spreading the ball around. But is that helpful to the Broncos defense, or how helpful will it be? Because Pat Surtain doesn't have to flip the field at all. He didn't have to worry about Jamar Chase or a Mike Evans or a DK Metcalf or whoever that may be. He can just stay on the left side. Riley Moss can stay on the right side. Jaquan McMillan and the other DBs, when they come in sub packages, can figure out what they're doing in the slot. And I understand they're going to get a little more creative, but then you aren't necessarily declaring whether you're in man or zone. And I think that can certainly work to the Broncos' advantage as well.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point because, what was the issue in Cincinnati? It wasn't that Jamar Chase was killing the Denver Broncos because Patrick Surtain was following Jamar Chase. It was the fact that T. Higgins had the opportunity to go up against Riley Moss, and T. Higgins is essentially a number one wide receiver as well. So, yeah, there's not somebody like a T. Higgins, a Jamar Chase, that when you go into the game, you're like, okay, we have to have a specific package and a specific game plan for that one person. For the Denver Broncos defense, the number one guy that they have to key on is the quarterback. So Vance Joseph can get kind of creative with some of his play calls to try to slow down Josh and just kind of let the back end of that defense ball. Let Brandon Jones kind of be the ball hawk that he has been this year. PJ Locke maybe put him in some blitz packages to try to get to Josh Allen, and then just have the hope, like you said, that Patrick Surtain, Riley Moss, and Jaquan McMillan will have the ability to just kind of plaster to the Bills wide receivers and not allow them to create any explosives. It's going to be interesting to see like the play calling early in this one. Like, how aggressive do you want to be if you're Vance Joseph? Do you want to establish the tone that right out of the gate you're going to put pressure on Josh Allen, that you're not going to mess around, but then have maybe a little bit of vulnerability in the back end of the defense and let up an explosive? It's going to be chess. It's going to be a chess match the entire time. It's going to be obviously Vance Joseph and Sean Payton, their ability to call the right plays in the right moments. And BK, as you know, when it comes to postseason football, I mean, it really just comes down to like 4 or 5 plays. And those 4 or 5 plays can be super impactful in the game. So I think the one thing, if I was Vance Joseph in the defense, I would come out aggressive and try to set the tone. Because, I mean, I know I'm not a head coach, and like head coaches don't think this way, but I'm like, you're playing with house money at this point. Like, no one anticipated you being in the postseason. Nobody has really picked you to win this game against Buffalo. You may as well go out swinging and try to throw some haymakers in this one early.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. And you touched on it with Bo Nix talking about they can play freer. And I got that sense being in the locker room, as I'm sure you did, that there is a looseness to this team. And it's not that they're so loose and carefree that they're not worried, obviously, but that you believe them when they say their goal wasn't just to get to the postseason. That means a lot in Broncos country. You weren't here the last time they were in the playoffs, let alone won a playoff game all the way back in Super Bowl 50. But it feels a lot longer than it really is when you look at an actual calendar year over year or understand what other franchises, you're from DC, and I want to kind of get through other playoffs, but the Redskins, then the football team, now the Commanders, back in the playoffs, and they've been in the playoffs here and there, but I don't think they've won a playoff game since 2005 against the Bucs. And the Broncos have obviously been to a couple Super Bowls and won one since then, and been to another AFC title game since then. And so it's understandable to be spoiled, because once you're spoiled, we see it with the Nuggets and Joker, and with what the Avs have with Nathan McKinnon and Cale Makar. But once you've been to that promised land and you've got these great players, you expect to be there. And so when you have John Elway and then you get Peyton Manning, you don't expect to go 8 years without a postseason appearance.
Yeah, I mean, to put it into perspective, the last time, I mean, when they won Super Bowl 50, I was in college. So, like, I didn't even, like, really know anything about the Denver Broncos. I just, like, tuned in to watch a Super Bowl, and I was like, I was a Colts fan growing up, so obviously I was like, maybe I'll root for Peyton Manning to win one more before he rides off into the sunset. But, yeah, I mean, if you're Broncos country, I think, like, what was interesting this year, and I'm sure you guys did it as well, like, once they started winning and it was, like, an obvious, like, they're going to go to the postseason, they kind of control their own destiny, like, we started getting selfish. Like, I was like, all right, what are the scenarios that they can get to be the number 5 seed? Because I'd love to see them go to Houston, not because I don't want to be in Buffalo and it's freezing cold out there and Houston has the indoor arena, but also you could take advantage of the Texans. But it started, like, once they started winning, like, the expectations of this team changed. And I think the vibe of the franchise, like, they were remembered of, like, how historic this organization is. Like, they weren't just, like, the punchline of sports anymore. They were like, oh, no, we are the Denver Broncos. Like, yeah, like, we have championships. Like, the Bills are known to choke in the postseason. Like, there is a chance that we can go. And, like, I've already, like, started to create scenarios in my head where, like, okay, the Broncos go on the road and they beat the Bills. Then they go to Kansas City. I totally think that they can beat Kansas City and Arrowhead. I mean, they should have won earlier this season. And then you start playing this game where it's like, and then. And I think that just goes to show, like, how likable this team is, how much, like, hope and faith that people have in Sean Payton. I think the fact that all the things that they've overcome this year, like the dead cap money, the fact that, like, tonight, like, Russell Wilson could probably blow it for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and then tomorrow the Denver Broncos could theoretically, like, get a postseason win while Russ is at home watching the game. Like, it's just interesting to see, like, winning can cure everything. And we saw that with the all pros that our guys got earlier this week, the Pro Bowls that people have. It's just interesting to see, like, how the tide has shifted from earlier this year. You remember the introductory press conference Sean Payton had before training camp. Like, he was asked about the 5.5 wins and, like, brushed it off. And he said, we expect to win. And I asked Cortland Sutton about that on Wednesday. Like, can you describe like Sean Payton's culture, because we throw the word culture out in sports way too much, I feel like. And Court said that like on his arrival, like he set the expectations for what he expected. And like I think that's important for the players because let's be honest, they have social media. I don't know if they watch TV as much as they did back when like Stuart Scott and all those dudes were on Sports Center. I don't know if they really care what Stephen A. Smith has to say. I certainly don't. But like they know like what people are saying, and so like they know what the outside expectations is. But the fact that they have a head coach that can come in and be like, "This is what my expectations are. This is how we're going to get it done." And now I think everybody in Broncos country has like the expectations of like, "Oh yeah, like we're going to go to the playoffs," and like people are going to doubt us, but people doubted us all regular season. So why can't we go on the road and beat the Bills in the postseason? And like, why can't we then go play the Kansas City Chiefs? So I think it's really just a belief, and it's cool to see kind of like the shift in mentality from when they were 0-2 to now going into the postseason.
All right. The last thing we're going to do, and so I want you to start thinking about this. The very last game we'll pick will be Broncos Bills, but we're going to go through all 6 playoff games, super wild card weekend. And look, I know what a big hoops fan you are. I went to the University of Kansas, and nothing, on the calendar gets me more excited than the first weekend of March Madness. But I think it just as a sports fan, super wild card weekend is maybe my favorite weekend of the year. And then next weekend with 4 games is right there as well. But 6 NFL playoff games, this is where the NFL has gotten it right again. So we're going to go through all 6 games. We'll do Broncos and Bills last, but I want to just ask everybody watching, or if you're listening to us, know the holidays came and went. It cost you a lot of money. You want to save some money on your mortgage payment? We'll go to trustedamerican.com to see how they can help you refinance your home and not have to make any payments for a little bit longer, get a little break there. Trusted American salary-based mortgage consultants want to help you get into a better interest rate and lower your monthly payments. Right now, they'll cover the cost of your appraisal. It's about a $650 value. So go to trustedamerican.com. Again, that's trustedamerican.com to see how much money they can save you today. So we will go through in chronological order, I guess, the games, and I'll give you the lines I had when I checked before we started the show, and that they'll fluctuate a little. But the game that's going to come your way, 4:30 on the East Coast where you and I are, 2:30 back home in Denver. The Texans, every time they make the playoffs, they play in the early game on Saturday. It's happened like 8 times in the 8 times they've gone to the postseason or whatever. So you got Chargers a 5 seed, 4 seed Texans. That game will be on CBS, and the Chargers are a 3-point favorite on the road. I'll go first, and then I just think the Chargers win the game. The Texans feel like they've taken a step back. Can you convince me otherwise? Are you right there with me that the Chargers are going to win this game?
No, I'm right there with you. Like, I think it's going to be an ugly game, and Chargers win these ugly games now that they have a head coach like Jim Harbaugh, who actually knows how to win games, unlike Brandon Staley and the coaches that they've had in the past. Yeah, I'm totally there with you. I think the Los Angeles Chargers actually win big in this one. I think it's like 24-10. But yeah, there's no way that the Texans win this game, even though they're at home. And this is why I was so mad when the Broncos lost on Thursday Night Football against the Chargers, because I thought there was a scenario where Denver could have jumped up to that 5 seed and played Houston. So yeah, I'm rocking with the Chargers in this one.
Do you think they cover? It's now down to 2.5. That's what I was glancing at. I think they do cover. I don't think it's a 1-point game. I think it's a field goal or better. So the fact that it's down to 2.5 means the Sharps are probably in on the Texans, but I'm with you. Not only they win, I think they cover.
Yeah, I think the final score is 24-10. Like I don't think it's a close one. I think they win by 2 touchdowns.
This line hadn't changed with a night game. And to take people behind the curtain, this as somebody who works in TV, you say, well, why wouldn't Ravens Steelers be the Monday night game to close out wild card weekend? Obviously, what's going on in LA is devastating, and LA is a huge market. We get it, but the Rams are more popular than the Chargers, but it's not the same LA Rams that it was back in the day. It's not New York. It's not the Packers. It's not the Cowboys. Even the Broncos is a national brand. You say, well, Ravens Steelers feels like the sexiest matchup. Turns out Prime Video, they only get one playoff game. They just spent billions of dollars to be a part of this package a couple of years ago, have that Thursday night. So that's why maybe the premier game, with apologies to the Packers and Eagles, which we know have great fan bases as well, that's the game tonight. 9.5 is that line. I think the Ravens cover. The Steelers are just taking a step back. I don't know if it's all Russ's fault. Nate Jackson said earlier this week on Off Field that apparently Patrick Queen, he's got the play call dot. He gets the play calls in his helmet. he's not the best at getting it out on time, and that's created a rift from guys like TJ Watt and other vets. I don't know why they wouldn't switch it to someone like Minkah Fitzpatrick or whatever it may be, but that there's a problem there. I think that the Ravens win this one going away and are looking forward to hosting somebody next weekend. I guess they could go to Buffalo potentially, but I think the Ravens are going to win this one like in that same kind of, you said 24-10, like 30-17 kind of range.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about you, but I've been watching the AFC North Hard Knocks and like the mic'd up moments that Russell Wilson has. Like, I kind of get like why a lot of his former Seahawk teammates like turned on him and like why there was a rift in the locker room and like why Sean Payton moved off of him because he's like not genuine in his leadership. And so I think like while they were winning, it was all cool. They were like, oh yeah, like there was the moments Najee Harris calling him, Mr. Unlimited, and they were all having a good time. But like the reality had to check in at some point, and they've lost 4 straight games. I don't think there's any momentum. George Pickens is an absolute nightmare, and they're going to go to Baltimore, and it's a night game. Like my dad covered the Baltimore Ravens for years, so like I would go to games with my dad and night games at M&T Bank Stadium. Like I think it's a top 5 environment in the NFL.
Yeah.
So like there's no way that Russell Wilson has any like confidence going into this one. And Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, I think that they just throw the first punch and then immediately the Steelers back down. Like I totally see it like being 34 to like 13, something like that. I think it's a blowout. There's no way that the Steelers win this one. And it totally, like when it first came out the line, I think it was like when it first came out, it was like a 10-point favorite for the Baltimore Ravens. And I was like, that's a bigger line than Broncos Bills. Then I started like looking at it. I was like, yeah, it kind of makes sense. Like Baltimore's playing with like elite confidence. Pittsburgh has no confidence. And then you got to go into the bank on a Saturday night. Yeah, it's like, it's not happening.
Yeah, I think that they're gonna cover. Like I said, we'll do Broncos Bills last. The second game of 3 on Sunday. As it stands, the Eagles got bumped up a half from earlier in the week. They are 5-point favorites because Jalen Hurts has cleared concussion protocol and Jordan Love clearly banged up. So you got the 7-seeded Packers in the NFC at the 2-seeded Eagles. That is on your network's air on Fox 31 in Denver. I think the Eagles are going to win that game. I'm not sure they cover. And I guess I should let you pick first. I keep picking first. But I still think the Eagles win that game. I'll give the score after, but how do you think it plays out?
Yeah, I don't think the Eagles cover. I think they win in a close one because Hurts has been in the concussion protocol. And doesn't Philly just feel like one of the most toxic good franchises in sports? Like they're always winning games, they're always playing well, and even when they're winning, like AJ Brown is causing an issue.
Right.
Or like Jalen Hurts is going to have to like calm down somebody cussing him out, or Sirianni's cussing a fan out, and I'm like, what is going on with this franchise? Like they win these games, but they can't get out of their own way. And I think
like they can't have nice things,
It's like, dude, like, can you just be appreciative of the fact that you guys like are a really good football team? Like, they always just keep getting in their own way. I think it's going to be a close one, though. I think even though I think Christian Watson's out with a torn ACL, so obviously that's another weapon for Jordan Love that won't be at his disposal. I mean, the Packers, they're one of those gritty football teams that even in the postseason when they're not favorites, they're going to make it interesting. So I think Philly ends up winning like maybe 24-21. But I do think it's a close one. I do think Philly pulls out just because I think they can just give it to Saquon and be like, hey, can you just milk the clock?
I was going to go right there with you in my head before you gave the score prediction. I was thinking like 23-20, over under is 45.5. So I think the Packers cover, but I do think that the Eagles will end up winning by a field goal. And so then the final game of the night, like I mentioned, Commanders, your hometown of DC, they hadn't won a playoff game since 2005 and hadn't really made any noise when they've been there. The handful of times where there's RG3 or Kirk Cousins, and we know it's been a minute otherwise. They're the 6th seed. The Bucs are the 3 seed. We know the Bucs find ways to win these games at home, including last year when they beat an Eagles team that had totally fallen off a cliff because of some of those problems you touched on. So Bucs, as of now, still sitting at that field goal favorite. They are 3-point favorites in Tampa. We know it's not the best home field advantage. There'll be plenty of Commanders fans that'll make the trip as well, or that live down there. But do your hometown Commanders not only steal a win? I found this out earlier in the week. Only 3 times ever has a rookie QB won a road game in the playoffs. They all have Broncos ties. Mark Sanchez, who was just a Bronco for training camp, did it with the Jets. They went to the AFC title game his first 2 years. Joe Flacco, obviously Broncos ties. He won a road game. Russell Wilson won a road game as a rookie in Seattle. The next year, of course, went on to win Super Bowl 48, but we don't like to talk about that here in Broncos country. Does Jaden Daniels, obviously that will come after Bo Nix, but does Jaden Daniels get added to that list with the Commanders at Bucks on Sunday Night Football?
First things first, I want to let people know I am from DC, but I grew up hating the Washington Redskins.
Yeah, I'm not saying that you're a fan. I'm saying it's your hometown.
No, I know, and I'm playing on the fact that I didn't go home for Christmas this year for a litany of reasons. But one of the main reasons is I don't think my friends wanted me back home because I started the Bo Nix Rookie of the Year campaign pretty early, and they were all mad because they said Jaden Daniels was going to win it, and he probably will, but I still think Bo Nix should win it. I do think the Commanders pull this out just because I don't really have faith in Todd Bowles, and I love Baker Mayfield, but I do think that this is going to be one of those scenarios where like Jaden Daniels doesn't know any better. Like he doesn't know that there's a process and that he probably should lose this game and learn from it and then come back the next year. Like I just think he's playing with like such a confidence. They're just going to go on the road and they're going to win this one. I don't think it's going to be a blowout by any means necessary. I think maybe like 31-23 Commanders. But yeah, I don't really trust Todd Bowles. I don't trust that Buccaneers defense. I think Mike Evans is awesome. But there's something about this Commanders team, and it's why like it pains me because I grew up hating the Redskins mostly because all my friends were Redskins fans, and also I hate Dan Snyder with a passion. And so now that Josh Harris is the owner and they seem to be doing good things in my hometown community, I'm like, okay, like I kind of like these guys. But yeah, I don't trust the Buccaneers in this one. I don't think that Tampa really is home field advantage. I think there's going to be a lot of Commander fans that are there, and I just think that in the end, I think Jaden Daniels pulls it out some way somehow.
Yeah, I'm kind of there with you. I haven't really drilled down, but I guess for the sake of this, I'm going to go just the opposite. I do think the Bucks with Baker, with Mike Evans, and Baker's been playing really well, and I've got all these different playoff fantasy games I'm trying to figure out. Like, and you got to pick a single quarterback for the weekend or whatever. And Baker's high on my list to have what I think could be a good game, although the Commanders' D has been solid, and they are getting, as Chris Harris pointed out this week on We're the Harrises, Marshawn Lattimore now fully healthy, and that could make a big difference. He's obviously had plenty of games against Mike Evans where some plays have gone his way, and certainly Mike Evans has had big days as well. So I'll take the Bucks begrudgingly, only to be on the opposite side there of you. All right, two left. Monday night, we know because of the tragedy with all the fires burning in SoCal, the league had to move the game to Arizona. Cardinals send their plane to bring the Rams and their staff and a handful of dogs and cats even and families to get them out of there and get to Arizona so they could finish out their practice week. The line originally had the Vikings as a 1.5-point favorite in LA, where we know isn't the biggest home field advantage anyway, but now you're going to go to Arizona where the crowd is going to be a mix of a lot of things, but probably more Vikings fans than you might have seen in LA. And so they're now 2.5-point favorites. It's on ESPN, ABC, and you can catch a Manning cast as well. I like the Rams. I trust the Rams more because of Matt Stafford, and what we saw from Sam Darnold makes me nervous. But how do you see it playing out?
I mean, first things first, want to send our thoughts and prayers to everybody in LA. Like, it's such a tragedy, and I don't want to make a prediction because of that, but I can't imagine like having to go through everything that those players and that organization is going through and then be like locked in on a game plan. Cause like, it doesn't, like at the end of the day, like this game really doesn't matter when like your livelihood of you and your family are at stake. And this game now is not going to be at home. So it's going to be in Arizona. So like now you're getting out of routine of like, oh, I get to sleep in my own bed. Now I have to stay in a hotel and like I got to make sure a wife and kids and everybody's all good. Like I just think it's so much stacked against the Los Angeles Rams and the Minnesota Vikings. I mean, they still won freaking 14 games in the regular season. Like the fact that they had to go on the road and now it's just a neutral site game. I don't think that the Rams defense is up to par to stop a receiving core like Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. I think Sam Darnold is going to bounce back after a tough game in Detroit. And I don't think this one's going to be particularly close. This one is going to be definitely one where I turn off Joe Buck and I go watch the Manning cast. Because if it's a close game, I watch Joe Buck. If it's a blowout, I just want to get entertained by Peyton and Eli. So I think this is going to be a ESPN2 viewing for me. I got the Vikings winning this one, I think like 38-20.
As much as I love Joe, and look, I grew up in Dallas. Troy Aikman and company won 3 Super Bowls the 4 years I was in high school. I still watch the Manning cast whenever it's on, even if it's my hometown Cowboys playing. If the Broncos are on on it, and they've only been on it, I think, once since Peyton's been doing this. I'm usually at the game. But either way, I'm all Manning cast all the time. I think you're right, though. I think they will be needing to be more entertaining. I like the Rams more at home. They find ways to win at home. We saw them beat the Bills despite Josh Allen putting up 6 touchdowns, 3 on the ground, 3 in the air, and they still, Matt Stafford and Puka and company and Kyron Williams outdueled them. But it does feel like the Vikings can bounce back. I guess there's a world where the Rams duplicate that exact same game plan and like we're double A gap blitzing all day, and you better deal with it, Sam Darnold, because you looked like Sam Darnold of old. But I think I'm going to pick the Vikings probably to cover too. Maybe not a blowout, though, something in that 23-20 range as well, or 27-24 kind of game. All right, so then the final game, I mentioned Bills. We spent obviously plenty of time on Bills Broncos. The Bills are 9-point favorites. I'm not saying it can't happen because a turnover here, turnover there, it could get away from them. And like we talked about off the top, against a handful of really good quarterbacks, they didn't win. They played okay against Herbert. If it goes a little differently, maybe they get out of Cincy with a 20-17 win, and Joe Burrow's numbers aren't as gaudy. Against Lamar, we know that didn't go great. Went fine against Mahomes in KC, but now you get Josh Allen on an MVP kind of season, even if Bo Nix has more yards and more touchdown passes. So how, as you're there in Buffalo since Thursday, how do you see it playing out?
I don't want people to think I'm being a homer on this one, but I made my prediction throughout the week, and it was 23-20 Broncos, and I'm sticking to it because of the sole purpose of I rewatched the Baltimore game because I was like, okay, how do the Broncos stack up against the upper echelon quarterbacks, the ones that are having MVP seasons? And I watched Baltimore, and that was a disaster. But also, Lamar had Derrick Henry, he had Zay Flowers, and looking back, Patrick Surtain didn't follow Zay Flowers. He was cooking the back end of that defense. And so I was like, okay, maybe that was an anomaly. And then I went and watched the game at Kansas City against Patrick Mahomes. I think if the Broncos play the Bills the way that they played the Kansas City Chiefs on the road against a really good quarterback who has okay weapons, but nothing spectacular, I think if they play the Chiefs, if they play the Bills the way they played the Chiefs, I see a path to them winning because they should have beat Kansas City, and hopefully special teams will not be the topic that we're going into the offseason with. I think if they do that where they put together 2 or 3 long touchdown drives and keep the ball out of Josh Allen's hands, I think that's going to be key. Like, as much as I'd love a 75-yard touchdown from Bo Nix to Marvin Mims, like, that would be great. It would take the air out of the stadium, but it gives the ball right back to Josh Allen. Your defense has to go right back out there. I think if they put together 2 or 3 touchdown drives that look like maybe 10 plays, 70 yards, 7-8 minutes, I think there's a scenario where if it's tight in the fourth quarter, and we talked about this going into the Kansas City game for week 18, that if it was close to the fourth quarter, Broncos country was going to turn on the Broncos. Like, there was going to be angst that, like, you guys are close with these backups. I think if the Broncos can do that to the Bills, where if it's going into the fourth quarter, Bills Mafia, those fireball shots are going to be wearing off. The table bruises are probably going to start feeling a little bit painful, and there's going to be a lot of angst inside Highmark Stadium. I think if it's close, similar to what they did last year on Monday Night Football, let the anxiety build in Bills Mafia, because I think if it's close, Sean Payton's going to have his guys like, we have them exactly where we want them. Like, we didn't think we were going to come in here and beat them by 30. We had to win a close one. So I think if they keep it close, they can pull one out. And so my prediction all week was 23-20 Broncos, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah, you gave a pretty good breakdown there that I can't add much to. And I kind of had a score similar to that, or maybe even a little bit higher scoring in that 26, 23, 27, 24 kind of range, where maybe it comes down to, as we saw a year ago, Will Lutz having to kick a game winner because Bo Nix has led them on a drive and they've slowed Josh Allen and company down. So, it'll be good to see at the stadium, and hopefully we're not only covering a Broncos win tomorrow, but also a trip to Kansas City, and who knows what happens there. We know that covering the playoffs is certainly more fun than just watching the playoffs. And so we're going to both watch the games tonight with intent and then have some fun tomorrow. Mick, thanks so much for the time. Great insight there, as you've been in Buffalo since Thursday. I'll see you at Highmark Stadium. And thank you again. Make sure you're watching Mick on everything he does on Fox 31 and Channel 2, especially with Colorado Sports Night that you're such a big part of. So, Mick, thanks for the time, and thanks to our friends at Trust American. Thanks to our pal Blake for helping us out on the back end, and we will catch you next time here on Off Field, and keep your social channels locked to everything we do at Guerilla Sports.